Okay, when you hear the name Immanuel Kant, what comes to mind? Probably, dense philosophy, stern morality, maybe a college class you barely survived. But what if I told you that the Kant we all think we know is only half the story? Today we're going to uncover the other half. We're talking about Kant the radical scientist, a guy whose ideas about the universe were just centuries ahead of his time.
You've probably heard this quote before, right? It's maybe his most famous. And look, we've spent, a couple of centuries focusing on that second part, the moral law within. And for good reason, it totally changed the world. But that first part, the story of the starry heavens above, well, that's where our story really begins.
Yeah, because long before he turned his gaze inward to the human mind, Kant's focus was aimed squarely at the cosmos. And what he saw out there, it literally laid the groundwork for modern cosmology. So the big question is, what did he see in those starry heavens?
All right, so let's get into the Kant you probably don't know. We're talking about the period before he published his famous critiques. Scholars call it his pre-critical phase. Back then, he was a natural philosopher. And listen, he wasn't just dabbling here. He was coming up with theories that are, frankly, just astonishingly modern.
Just look at some of these ideas. A universe starting as a chaotic cloud of particles, galaxies organizing themselves through gravity and repulsion. That is the absolute foundation of our modern nebular hypothesis. And get this, matter is essentially concentrated energy? That sounds a lot like a preview of Einstein, right? And linking space and force, he was basically intuiting this deep connection that physics wouldn't nail down for centuries. And you have to remember, he's writing all of this in the mid-1700s. It's just wild.
So you gotta ask, where did these revolutionary ideas even come from? Well, to get that, you have to understand the two powerful and deeply conflicting forces that shaped his youth. On one side, you have the wonder of the natural world, and on the other, the rigid dogma of his education.
So on one hand, you have his mother, Anna. Kant talked about her his whole life. He said she opened my heart to the impressions of nature and really encouraged his curiosity, a real source of wonder. But then you have his school, the Collegium Fridericianum. It was a pietist school, and he later remembered it with, and I'm quoting here, terror and fear. He called it the slavery of his youth. Just imagine, a world of fanatical discipline and constant instilled guilt. And this is what makes his scientific achievements so incredible. His school basically thought science was heresy. They only taught the most elementary math. Kant didn't even know about calculus for years. So everything, literally everything he would figure out about the cosmos, he had to build himself, from scratch. He was overcoming this huge gap in his own education.
So what does he do with this background? Well, fueled by everything he taught himself, Kant sets out to build a whole new cosmology. His goal, explain the entire universe using just two things, matter and force. Now, that might not sound crazy to us, but back then, it was a radical idea that challenged Isaac Newton and the church.
The absolute core of his whole system was this concept he called active force, or vis activa. See, for Kant, force wasn't just a push or pull on an object. No, it was the fundamental stuff of reality itself. Think of it like this active pulse radiating outward, literally weaving the fabric of space and clumping together to become what we call matter. It's a pretty mind-bending idea. And this idea of force led him right to his masterpiece from this early period, the nebular hypothesis. So here's how it goes. He said the solar system started as this huge, chaotic cloud of dust and gas. Then you get two forces at play, gravity pulling everything together and this repulsion force creating spin. That dynamic duo causes the whole cloud to start organizing itself. It flattens into a massive disk, the center gets super dense, and boom, ignites as a sun. And the leftover bands of stuff, they clump together and become the planets. It's brilliant.
But here's the most revolutionary part. His theory described a universe that could build itself. This was a direct shot at Isaac Newton, who was convinced that God had to kind of step in every now and then to keep the planets in their orbits. Kant was saying, nope. He was proposing a completely natural, evolutionary cosmology, a universe that could assemble itself from the ground up, no divine tinkering required.
Okay, so by the 1760s, Kant has built this incredible, elegant, unified system. It explains everything from how galaxies are born to how the human mind works. He is at the absolute peak of his game. His intellectual confidence is soaring. And then, it all comes crashing down, utterly shattered by, of all things, the writings of a Swedish mystic.
Just try to put yourself in his shoes for a second. In his mind, he'd connected everything.
The physical world, the spiritual world, it was all just a product of this one fundamental dynamic force. He basically had a theory of everything. He'd explain the starry heavens. I mean, seriously, what could possibly go wrong?
This quote says it all. It's from a letter he wrote to a friend, and it just captures the moment his entire world flipped upside down. What happened? He read the works of this mystic, Immanuel Swedenborg, these incredibly detailed visions of the spirit world, and after reading them, Kant was plunged into this deep, deep crisis of self-doubt. He felt like he had to mock his own work before anyone else got the chance.
So why? Why would a mystic's spiritual visions shake a scientist like Kant to his very core? Well, think about it. Swedenborg was describing this spiritual world full of angels and dynamic forces, all in super intricate detail. And what had Kant done? He'd described a physical world built from interacting forces, and that was the horrifying parallel. Kant looked at his own grand system and suddenly feared it was no different from the mystics, that it was just an elaborate, well-argued, but ultimately unprovable fantasy, a wild figment of the imagination.
You can imagine, this crisis was absolutely devastating. It brought his life's work to a screeching halt. But, sometimes in the destruction of our old ideas, something new and even more powerful is about to be born.
What came next is what scholars call Kant's silent decade. For 10 long years, this brilliant mind published almost nothing. He just withdrew, completely consumed by this massive problem he'd uncovered. And then, in 1781, the silence finally broke. And the result? Oh, just one of the most important books ever written, The Critique of Pure Reason.
And this is the huge shift, the big pivot in his thinking. The Critique wasn't another book about what the universe is made of. The crisis had taught him he was asking the wrong question entirely. He realized that before he could ever hope to describe reality, he had to first investigate the very tool he was using to do the describing, human reason itself. He had to map it out, its powers, its structure, and, crucially, its absolute limits.
And that's really the final piece of his transformation. You have the young Kant, the radical scientist, who reached for the starry heavens by building this grand system of the universe. But then you have the mature Kant, the one forged in that crisis of doubt, who turned his gaze inward. And by examining the structure of the mind itself, he was finally able to establish a foundation for the moral law. That's how he became the philosopher we all remember.
So in the end, Kant's journey shows us something pretty amazing. His greatest breakthrough didn't come from finding an answer. It came from a devastating question. It came from having the courage to doubt his own best ideas, to tear it all down, and to start again. Which kind of leaves us with a question for ourselves, right? What great work might be waiting on the other side of questioning our own best ideas?